Hey everyone, welcome to the ProfNoctis Show. I am Evan. I'm here with Wade, and we are so excited for our upcoming interview with SchrodingersBabySeal, aka Clarke. And we have a special surprise for you after this introduction. Wade, what can we expect?
That's right, Evan. Today we are excited because we are kicking off our Final Fantasy VII Rebirth lecture series with an amazing interview. So good, in fact, that it is a two-parter. So you'll
Woohoo!
get part one today, part two next week, and then we're going to get a lot of other content creators on to interview them as well. But today we are also kicking off our channel theme song, written and performed by Husky by the Geek himself. So go throw him some love. And with that, let's mosey. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Prof Weekly Show. I am Wade, aka ProfNoctis. I'm here with my co-host Evan. What's up, Evan?
Hey everybody.
And today we are delighted to have Final Fantasy creator, Final Fantasy VII creator specifically, SchrodingersBabySeal, aka Clarke. What's going on, bud?
Hi, guys.
It is awesome to have you on the show. And I nerd out every time I get to talk to you because you have like just so many cool ideas, theories, and you are, like I said to you off stream, you are like the maven of the Final Fantasy community, connecting people. Like I got to meet so many people just because you were like, hey, you've got a cool vibe. Come talk to these people that have cooler
Amazing.
vibes. And like we all kind of work together. It's awesome. So I love getting to talk to you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Appreciate it. And hey, the pleasure's all mine. Like,
Oh man.
I'm the one that's geeking out that I get to meet all of you. Okay.
Oh.
So let's have it. Yeah. Let's definitely competitively be humble.
Okay.
towards each
We
other,
love
okay?
that.
So far, I'm winning.
Okay, you are very good at humility. But you know what? Like I will cede your greatness in this realm because I am so low in humility.
Oh God.
It's hard to beat.
Yeah.
Out
Hard to beat
humble
that
to
one.
me. So.
Yeah.
Well, we are really excited to have you here today. And Evan, this is your first real experience with Clarke,
This
isn't
is
it?
my first time getting to meet Clarke. We had a really fun time pre-show, so I'm very, very excited about where
I'm
we're
confident
headed.
this is going well. Yeah.
Yes. So far, we're having a great time, and I'm looking forward to our conversation here too. So, for me, well, I could say confidently, the most humble. Thank you for coming.
Well, for those who may be watching or listening, and you're like, "Who is this guy? Why do we care?" Maybe you're not in the Final Fantasy community, and this is not necessarily a stream household name for you. Let me tell you a little bit about him, and then you'll be able to hear a little bit more of Clarke's story from our discussion. I first started watching some of your streams when I was like, I don't know, eyeballs deep into Final Fantasy VII Remake lore. And so you kept curating conversations all the time. And I was like, what are people thinking about this? Because if you're anything like me, you played the game, you have some thoughts, but then you don't realize how wrong you were until you get online, right?
Absolutely.
You were kind of like the curator of all of these different thoughts, and I deeply appreciated that. So I guess to kind of kick us off, how did you get into content creation, and like was Final Fantasy VII kind of your first foray into it, or tell us a little bit about that story?
Well, for content creation, yeah, Final Fantasy VII was kind of my first foray into it. And how it really started is that in my outside life, I started gaining some relationships and partnerships that were getting me close to the video game development, and had a like sort of tertiary relationship to remake. And I can't really discuss what that looks like in any concrete way, sadly, but because I was like really in that, I started looking at the way that, I went online to see how people were reacting, responding, and one of the first things that kind of pulled me into content directly was Sleep Easy. Sleep Easy made a series of videos, and I really liked the idea that there was all of this educational opportunity in the lore. The reason I said that is my scholastic history has taken me into all varieties of religion and myth, and we've briefly talked about that, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more directly later in the conversation. But in one of Sleep Easy's videos, he makes reference to Nibelheim and how he learned as a result of theory crafting that Nibelheim meant the home of the mist. And he was able to make this correlation. And something about him making that correlation made me realize, this medium has such a strong, I think it's a strong opportunity to get people fascinated in stuff that I, really geeked out in. And I had to kind of go the long way. I got into Final Fantasy. I got into a lot of my studies because Final Fantasy VII made me wonder what these words meant. And when I saw them later on in, a philosophy or history class, I'd be like, I recognize it from Final Fantasy VII. Seeing that happen in reverse and seeing him seek out information because he saw it in Final Fantasy VII, was really it was eye-opening and made me fascinated in the idea of making content around Final Fantasy VII. And then I go and I look at the content creator sphere, and I also see that people, very rational people, interpreted things wildly differently than I did from the events of Remake. And I'm like, this is awesome. I love this. I love, I haven't felt this way since the good seasons of Lost, or 10 years after Twin Peaks, when that community started to become its own thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love the reference. Lost is a pretty apt comparison, because I remember those days of what's going to happen next season, or what do we think is happening at this point? And that really, the choice to make the remake trilogy across multiple installments instead of just one cohesive game, I think it's really done some great things as far as our discussions stuff. Because if it was just one release, one and done, a super, I guess, 300+ hour game, if they were to do it this way, once you finish and roll credits, hopefully most of the questions are answered. But I like this sort of liminal space that we can kind of imagine and conjecture. That's really, really cool. So just to be clear, you picked up Final Fantasy VII back in the day, like the 1997 version, and that's what got you into it?
I'm old enough to have played it within the launch window.
Yeah, me too.
I could legally drive when I first played it too.
Okay. So you could go and pick it up for yourself, and then it's good.
Yeah. So I experienced it as, a 16-year-old, and so I was just peaked out of adolescence, and and it sort of defined a lot of how I conceptualized my high school experience.
Say more about that. Conceptualized your high school experience. I was just a couple years younger than you, it sounds like, but I remember it speaking directly to my own sense of identity. I'm really curious what your journey with it might have been.
I think the most, I think after it got me with the whiz bang of it all, the flashy, it's hard to kind of, if you weren't there, it's really hard
to be there, really,
to know how over the top of a leap Final Fantasy VII was generationally. still say this, and I believe this to be true. It was the first AAA game.
Mhm.
There were TV ads for other games, don't get me wrong, but this was the first one where everybody was like, "What
This
is
was an
that?"
event.
And it was an absolute event. The FMVs were I mean, look like Lego graphics now, but they were so over the top
It was
awesome.
amazing.
And like things like you went through a 50-hour game, for us completionists,
Mhm.
with really good synth MIDI music, and then you get to the last track and they start singing and you're like, what's
What is
happening?
this?
This is so nuts. So I'll admit that the flashbangery of it all was really just like it up to the presentation of gaming and storytelling in video games, and sort of cemented the medium as something that can tell stories from a presentation standpoint. It absolutely did that. But the messaging really defined the way that I, sort of had an experience in high school. And I went to a private high school,
Hmm.
and it was a conservative private high school. And, with a religious slant. And it wasn't really my choice, but it's just what happened. And so I was kind of surrounded by, even in '97, there was so much pushback from ideas around tree huggers and environmental protection. But I happen to live in a really beautiful area that we were seeing the effects of ecological damage already, just from poor choices being made, by city planning and stuff like that. And so I had this real connection to nature already, loved animals as a kid. And so from a messaging perspective, the environmental stuff already made me feel like, hey, I'm kind of an outsider in how I perceive that we should treat the world here. And I didn't really even understand from like from a religious perspective why so many people in my peer group were anti-environmentalist, when it seemed like there's pretty solid protect the planet, messaging in the Bible, just as an example.
Sure. Creation care is an entire realm of theology.
Absolutely. So, eh, so that was a part of it. But the other thing was that, I really, as many, adolescent and teen boys, struggled with the concept of identity. And Final Fantasy VII's true plot crux centers around Cloud's identity.
Yeah.
And if you make it past the shock parts, with Aerith dying and stuff like that, there's this whole other thing that's the actual main point of the story. And that resonated with me so strongly. This idea of kind of changing the way that I thought of what it meant to be a hero. Like a hero is being honest with yourself. A hero is about how you contribute to the collective more than how you appear. And that heroics can take a back seat. And that really, like, he wasn't on his own. Instead, when he started to rely on others and rely on the collective, to put himself together, Cloud was able to overcome insurmountable odds. And it was put in a way that really it's super common now. It's almost tropey, particularly in Japanese media, but it's tropey because it's emulating Final Fantasy VII, in a lot of ways. A lot of the successes of Final Fantasy VII in particular became tropes because of the success. So it resonated a lot with the way that I, sort of identified myself, the things that I valued in a person, in my high school experience. And so that's kind of how it led me.
These two things, and you mentioned a few others, but a hero is being honest with himself and a hero contributes to the collective. These are pretty substantial things for a high schooler to really conceive of and conceptualize. As it was contributing to your identity, what do you think it means to for a person? I deal with this with freshmen at the university setting all the time. If you were to say, this is what it means to be honest with yourself and to contribute to the collective, how might you steer that in a way that is relevant and applicable? Because I do think that this is a pretty universally relevant story, but a lot of people, turn it into a lot of different things. But this is something that's like ground level sort of stuff. So how does that conceptualize and actualize in your everyday sort of high school life?
Well, I mean, there was a lot of media at the time that I don't want to say romanticized, but it did validate isolationism, and so being the cool loner and stuff like that. And I get that it can be very challenging and dangerous and risky, to develop interpersonal relationships as you're getting into the teens. But how this actualized for me is instead of like seeing myself as this island, I put some of my guards down. I let down some of the walls and opened myself up to be a part of. And I was much happier as a result. Started to get friends and started to understand the value of friends and started to understand the value of being a friend. How much that helps you develop like a healthy understanding of the world, helps you develop empathy and sympathy. And so it really was kind of a game changer for me. And I cite that often, and I don't know how much of that is revisionist or I was just getting lonely, but having that as kind of a guidepost, is like sort of this moral guidepost, is when Cloud stopped trying to idealize this version of a hero that handles all of his problems on its own, doesn't rely on others, is a kind of caricaturized strong. Like he's a caricature of what a strong person is. Sort of the, this kind of absurdist Ubermensch, and that was the ideal that he placed. He placed it on Zach, but it probably more came from Sephiroth, and it is unsustainable for human living to be that way. And and it caused his psyche to be so fractured that when he got to a breaking point, the person that he created was based on this unsustainable model for living. And so when he fell apart again and he had real people with him who, were other-centered and collectivistic, the person that was rebuilt, that was reformed, was much more functional and had much more utility in actually saving the world. Because that's who really does save the world, is, real people who, put aside, their defects or are honest with themselves about their defects and focus on being useful to others. So I don't know if I could say that as eloquently as a teenager, as an edgy teenager, but in retrospect, that's kind of how it actualized for me.
All right, everybody, it's that time of the episode. You know what time it is. It's our mini game stretch break. Wade, let's hit that music. 3, 2, 1. That was great. Clarke, thank you for tuning in on that. That's awesome.
You really got us back on melody. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. So the running gag is that I actually don't know what the melody is. So even though, fine. So ladies and gentlemen, minigame stretch break. It's our time to get to know each other a little bit more. If you're on the YouTube, you will see the bingo wheel of vulnerability here. There are numbers 1 through 50 in this bingo wheel, and Wade has our questions from this week. Let's talk a little bit about what card deck we're pulling from, though.
We're today pulling from the Hero's Journal side quest deck. This is the original version. The Hero's Journal is a great way to think about your life using the hero's journey. I use it in some of my classes. And these cards in this deck are a great way to have side quests for your life.
Love it. Okay, so 1 through 50. Clarke, as our guest, you get to choose first. Which number
39.
would you like? What?
39.
All right, Clarke has guessed 39. Wade, what do you want?
15.
15.
That was the number last week, so I'm going for it.
There you go. There we go. I'll go 14, Wade.
Wow.
How about that? Clarke, as our guest, I'm going to spin it. Listener, you
Right.
can hear it. You hear it going here. You just tell me when, and I'll stop it to grab one.
Okay.
Is that a when? Is okay when?
When?
All right, here we go. That's the yellow one. 45. 45.
45. Hey, you were close.
45. Close. That was close. That was close. So, listener, if you guessed 45, you win. Let us know in the comments. Wait, 45th question.
Okay.
Maybe count backwards 5.
Yeah, I got you.
One time,
Okay, here.
we had him
here
counted
is
out,
the
and we
question.
counted all the way up to like 34.
We sure did. I've since figured out a solution to that. So I have
As you do.
stacks of 10. It's great. So here it is. Here it is. When was the last time you took a break from technology? When was
Ooh.
the last time you took a break from technology?
And I forgot to physically stretch during the stretch break, so I'm going to get my stretch
do
in
that
while I
now.
think about that there. Yeah.
When was
so-
the last time you took a break from technology, and what was it like? Intentional or unintentional? What was the effect?
Okay. Okay. So I Friday through Saturday, every single week of summer, take a 9-hour hiatus from my phone and all technology while I'm playing volleyball on a beach. And for reasons I won't say here, you can't have your phone on you.
There you go. How has that practice been, like, life-giving, I assume? Is it anxiety producing? Because as a content creator, I mean, you're disconnected, right?
Life
How is
changing.
it?
It is
Life
so
changing.
good. It is so good because you'll come back and you'll see that people have completely resolved, like started and resolved a conflict without your involvement.
Wow.
And you're like, okay, I'm glad it turns out I wasn't needed. And it's fine.
Wow.
It's fine. It's fine. And it's like it's always good to remember that you're not the center of the universe. Like it's, like that you're a part of, like it's really easy to get into. All of us get into the, well, I don't know about you guys. You guys seem very
You can speak for
grounded
me.
and
You have
level-headed.
permission. You can speak.
You can
for
put it
me.
on
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
can speak
like
for us.
the constant fight against main character syndrome
Mhm.
in society it's harder now than it was then.
Never.
And there are other things that are easier now. So I'm not like an anti-futurist. Like I don't want that to
Mhm.
be the takeaway here. But I think that anything that you can do to actively participate in disconnecting from the idea that a world revolves around you,
Mhm.
a world or the world, and instead like you get to be a part of the grander thing. Life's more beautiful that way. It's so much easier. It's so much more comfortable. You're more comfortable in your own skin. It's the best.
That's incredible. Evan, what about you?
Long form, I had a trip to out west, and it was like a mindfulness retreat, and none of our phones worked anyways, and the Wi-Fi was negligible. So that was probably the last like really long chunk of time.
Mm.
I've been in a micro sense, it's summer here and it's really hot, and I really love going to the pool and floating with like a book or something, and it kind of, phones are waterproof now, so you're kind of like, I can have my phone in the pool, whatever. But that is a really nice escape to just kind of feel like you're floating and then mentally align yourself with kind of that bodily feeling. It's kind of where I end up without the technology.
That's so good.
Love
How about
it.
you, Wade?
Again, for me, kind of like y'all, it's about bodies of water, being at the beach or being at the lake or whatever it is. And I found a few times this summer where I just left my phone in like the hotel room or the condo or whatever, and didn't even think about it during the day. And it's amazing how you just get back in touch without the constant barrage of information. I was telling somebody the other day, I was like, without my phone, it's easier to get bored, and that's a good thing
Yeah.
because boredom is like a necessary ingredient for creativity, I think. And so it just catalyzed a lot of good stuff in me. So great. However, you all who are listening or watching disconnect from tech, we would love to hear about it in the Discord or over on Twitter/X. We'd love to hear about your stories
Get your stretches in.
and how you have gotten your stretches in this week. So one last stretch before we leave. There it is.
I'm stretching like I'm a baby wanting to be picked
You were
up.
just like, pick me up.
All right,
So
back to the episode. I think it's really neat that the game modeled something for you. Friendship, opening yourself up to relationships, but then it created a framework for you to take risks in your real life outside of the digital world to experience that. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that moment was like when you got up to that decision-making process. Were you just playing the game and you had this epiphany that you were closed off to the world around you, so you needed to step out and try and build some community? What helped you get to the point where you felt like, you know what, it's worth it to take a chance here. It's worth it to risk this, to have the change in my life that I want to see?
I absolutely had a moment after playing the live stream sequence, particularly. We call it the live stream sequence. I don't know, that's Cloud's Mind, right?
Yeah.
So playing that segment, where it was the first time I'd ever been emotional playing a game, and really can't think of too many times where watching or consuming a piece of media had made me emotional. And it made me feel like a very complex mixture of shame and of revelation. Like I may have been doing my life wrong up to this point, and that it was palpable and real. And how long that takes to come into practice, it's a process. It's not it's very rarely that any kind of change in my life has been binary, like that. There's been other times where I sort of fell into other types of life disarray, and but there have been other times in my life further on down the road where I kind of do think of my Cloud's Mind moment, and so there's been poetry and repetition to this lesson in my life as it's gone on, but I do remember very specifically while playing the game having to take a breather before switching to the next disc. And it was for that very reason. It hit me like a ton of bricks.
I appreciate you sharing that, because that's really cool that there's one specific moment that you can point to, because there's so many times in our life that it's just this amalgamation of decisions, and just a lot of things kind of cycle around. Just over time, we start to realize the changes that we need to make. And so to get an actual aha moment and to be able to point to where you were in the game when you had it, I think is very cool to have something concrete. For people who are maybe experiencing those things, I hesitate to call them whispers with the two of you, but for people
that's a good word here for me.
This is a safe space to say whispers.
Or whispers, yes.
I won't claim what they are, but for those people who are experiencing those moments but have a hard time kind of actualizing them, maybe like you did, to have it result in something concrete where you knew that you needed to take a risk and make a change, maybe what encouragement or what advice would you give to folks who are playing games and maybe they start to experience something, but then they kind of let it go? They don't know how to make it real in their life, kind of like you did, in a way that sounds like it really was a big change in your life.
You know, I, I'm remiss to say lean in. Know yourself a little bit. Sometimes some people, everybody's, where there's all varieties, of neurotypicality and neurodivergence, and sometimes there are risks to leaning into that kind of feeling, and you have to know, and uh, make sure that what you're doing is safe when you're leaning into something that's making you feel a certain way. Like, is this rational? Is that stuff? But if you feel like it's, uh, if you're stuck, and you are getting something kind of telling you, hey, this is speaking to how you are stuck. This is
Mhm.
speaking to a feeling that you felt stagnant on. Um, take the risk and lean in a little bit, and you can always come back out. There's or don't do it alone. Like, get somebody else with you, find a friend, family, and say, hey, walk down this path with me. As awkward as that feels, like, I can't stress enough how valuable it was for me. And if it's not valuable for you, all that you've lost is a little bit of time. you know
Yeah,
That's
to have those conversation partners, it strikes me, even as you were saying, it almost sounded like you were using some of the same words. I love the ad campaign of friends and
Y-
support that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has really conveyed. Square Enix has really done a great job of buying billboards and ads
Mhm.
for this kind of mental wellness and
Yeah.
doing life together, which I think is a really nice thing. And it perfectly aligns with some of the themes that you've extracted from the Seven compilation, the original as well.
Yeah.
Um, and it does strike me, Cloud in his self-actualization, it isn't just his journey, but Aerith says that she's trying to find him, and she's set on helping him do that. Tifa, iconic in the live stream sequence, right? And
Yeah.
absolutely instrumental in helping repair Cloud. And just for those that may not be familiar with the Final Fantasy VII story, the live stream sequence is this again. Just it is the psychological crux of the entire game's story, where this fragmented Cloud, depicted by multiple versions of the protagonist at different points in his life, begin to merge back together because he's had a
Right.
kind of fractured, broken sort of existence. And it is a climactic moment in Cloud's hero's journey, I guess,
Yeah.
when all of those kind of come together, which is a pretty interesting lead in to some of our discussions about Seven Rebirth,
Mhm.
especially with the concepts of multiple worlds and all of that kind of stuff. So I guess, the question that I would have is, the original game hits you incredibly powerfully. You undoubtedly have not only memories, but nostalgia and maybe a little bit of guardianship
Mhm.
over those memories. So how did Remake and now Rebirth really play with that for you? I know a lot of people it tampers with it, but what was your experience?
And I mean, to say that it's sacred to me, I think I'm not a sanctity guy in terms of that. I really, I think one of the things that's most sacred to me now, later, after, becoming perhaps media over literate or media saturated here,
Mm,
is one of the most sacred things to me is innovation and art. You'd probably, well, you maybe not, but some people might be surprised to know I'm not a big fan of remakes as a construct. Like, I don't like them too much. Uh, for a variety of reasons I won't get into here, but um, so I was, when FF7R was first announced, I was a little bit trepidatious
mm,
that we were getting into something that was kind of a soulless cash grab,
mm,
for to kind of uh, abbreviate my feelings on the subject. But when I kind of started to get an idea around 2019 when trailers started to come out that indicated they might be taking some creative risks here. The thing that I was most concerned about is that somehow Cloud's identity would not be something that was covered at all, but I've always been open to the idea of perhaps them covering it in a little bit more modern way, because we've come really far in the field of psychology.
Yeah.
In the past, since 1997. And my one of my family members is a PhD forensic psychologist, and so getting to go through that experience with them and watching the way that's evolved, and then obviously academically, the relationship between psychology and philosophy has always been really close, and so generally we have at least a tertiary understanding of the advancements in the field. I'm talking to Wade here. We get an idea of how that's evolving. Since so much psychology is based on people that contributed to both magisteria, so to speak.
Right.
And so seeing how much we've sort of changed the framework of how we look at identity, how we look at mental health. I was very okay with them using the adaptive elements of the re-trilogy, the parts that they might take some liberties with to expand that, or make that maybe even more relevant, because I want it to have the same impact that it would have on a kid in 1997 as it would on a kid in 2024, which is going to be different because the conversation is different around mental health and identity. It's a different conversation now than it was in 1997. And so if this is going to deliver on the same front, on the same messaging front, it needs to up its game. And so I'm fully okay with them revising some messaging to make it more relevant. As far as plot details and stuff like that, I've been
before we go into other specifics, I would love for you to elaborate on that. How has the re-trilogy upped the game in those original themes, particularly relating to identity?
Okay, well, so I think just on a base level, it's addressed the idea of gender identity as an actual construct. It did so in Remake, and that's contemporary. That's an important thing to say. I think it also tackled that in a way that's much less problematic than the honeybee scene in 1997. With a emphasis on inclusion. There's a lot of emphasis on inclusion. So just on a broad sense of identity, but talking about Cloud specifically, because of the scale of the game, because we're taking a 40-hour journey and putting it over 300 hours. We're looking at it's hard to make what happens to Cloud seem like anything other than a MacGuffin if it's the same length as it was in the OG, if it isn't being addressed consistently throughout, and we're not seeing the way that his fractured identity impacts the people around him, and the way that the people around him treat him for his fractured identity. Using for instance the difference between the way that, say, Tifa, Aerith, and Avalanche in general, like even Barrett, the way that they are showing, particularly in Rebirth, are showing him and the other reunion clones the sense of compassion. They're seeing them as uh, people that benefit from support rather than contempt. That being used as a foil to the way that Shinra and Sephiroth, like most of Shinra, not like Reeve and the good ones, the way that those sort of antagonistic forces treat and utilize Cloud's mental state, and I think there is commentary to be made about how certain organizations, institutions, and power structures capitalize on mental illness. And I can just say that from my own experience in the military. And I don't want to get too deep into that, but that's something that I feel like the messaging reflects in Final Fantasy VII, and by showing in Rebirth, that there are multiple ways that we can deal with identity issues. I think it highlights the issue really well.
What do you think it is that's powerful about a story in a video game that's able to address topics like that is maybe different than other forms of media?
And Final Fantasy VII was one of the first games that I really noticed they did this, but they play with agency a lot. Agency in, player agency has this ability to connect you to the character that no other media does.
Yeah.
That's beyond argument. In the OG, something that's always really struck me as one of the boldest choices they made, like almost a Kojima level choice, was when you are at the Forgotten Capital. Big spoilers here. Forgotten Capital, and you're walking towards Aerith. You can move the joystick, but it forces you to only move it in this way that raises your sword over Aerith's head. So you have this agency all throughout the game, and then right there you are robbed of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a way to connect you with the way that sometimes you lose control, and especially when we're dealing with identity, agency, and mental illness, that can be a very relatable experience for people, and in a way that won't translate just watching.
Mm-hmm.
Like if your hand is on the trigger and it's forcing you, and you feel like you've had this very consistent ability to engage, and it's gone, losing that feeling is so personal, and it's so relatable.
Can we talk for just a second about how, and I was personally surprised by it, how impactful the HD haptics on the new controller were for the PS5 to the storytelling experience? To be able to have like an accurate representation of what it would feel like to be in a vehicle or riding a horse, but then the trigger pulls to be able to have resistance, and the way that would impact my engagement with a story and tension. Like the fact that the trigger pull is actually more difficult and feels tighter was a dimension of storytelling that I did not expect in getting into this kind of next generation. I don't know what you guys' experience with it was, but it was crazy.
Evan, which is exactly, the moment that Clarke's talking about, the moment of decision with Aerith, right? In Rebirth, you are clicking those triggers. You're trying to move it, and you have a very sort of tangible resistance and feeling in your hands and your body and in your memory making, all of it. I remember that moment in a powerful way now, and I wasn't sure that it would work out.
Right.
Because my biggest fear was, oh gosh, are they going to turn this into a quick time event?
Yeah.
But the way that they did it really evokes that sense of, I don't want to do this.
Right.
That was very much PS1 era. Like, let's move the sword left and right. Let's go a little higher. They did such a great job. What strikes me about this conversation, though, is that you are bringing, and I love to use this term when I'm discussing Seven or any game. You're bringing so many simultaneous lenses to each of these moments, right? You've got this lens of identity, you've got this lens of agency, and a lens that I would dare say, somewhat defined as the game does, as destiny to be defied, fate to be subverted in some ways, and the gameplay is really playing into that. These lenses that you are utilizing for the game, did you bring these lenses to Rebirth beforehand, or did you discover them from the game itself?
Maybe a little mixture of both. I think there's room to say that some of the lenses came from the OG for me.
Yeah.
And just my world experience, scholastically and otherwise. But I do think that when I'm talking about how the message is more contemporary now, seeing things in a contemporary way. There, in particular, the decision to make like the reunion club, like as much as I didn't like it creatively, like Nibelheim is sort of a reunion rehab. Like I like the concept that we are seeing these reunion clubs as victims instead of like mindless sacrifices or pawns, and we are seeing and we're applying that to Cloud as well. That's something I really had not conceived of as a possibility as to something that they can do to enhance the messaging about how we treat the stigma of mental illness. I really, so that's a new lens. That's a lens I got from playing Rebirth.
That is such a cool insight. That I like you. I'm not sure I picked up on that from the OG, but the idea of, we could just create these caricatures of these robed experiments, failed experiments or whatever. But then you've also got to say that about Cloud. It's like, oh, this is someone we know, and to lay that onto any level of difference or demographic or divider. We have this person that we know, and then we have this archetype out there that we don't know. That creates some great dissonance for the player, and I think that's really powerful, potent stuff.
Yeah, agreed.
So I'd like to get into some of this stuff with Rebirth. Now, would you like? I'd like to get into some exact points because as you may have heard or seen, Evan and I like to approach Final Fantasy VII Rebirth as almost like a crime scene, and for some people it feels like a crime scene to them. It's like, that was my childhood that you just massacred, and so we're at the crime scenes. We're trying to figure it out and put it all together and stuff. Now my heart. I adore this game, right? And I've played it. I've just gushed over it for hundreds of hours at this point. And I know that you have done the same, but it does demand a little bit of thinking and a little bit of like wondering, curiosity as to what exactly is going on. So there's a few realms that I would love to kind of get into here.
Sure.
First of all, I'd like to just say, let's dive right into the big one there. And let's talk about Aerith's death. We've already kind of mentioned it a little bit. At the end of Rebirth, what do you think is happening with Aerith's death, allegedly, and what happens just beyond that, quote, death sequence?
Okay, so I would like to preface this that I would not mind being wrong about the way that I perceive this.
Sure.
I got a review copy, and I had nobody to talk to about the game for a month.
That must have
I
been
just
torture.
sat with the game, and I just watched. I had to just watch the ending over and over again with my own footage, my own copy, and reflect with nobody. And I can tell you, walking away from it, my perception was that the nature of the scene was to serve Cloud's identity crisis, right?
Okay.
So I am of the mind, like if I were to, put money on it, is that we've got a force feeding Cloud's delusion, and I think that that delusion was a like Hail Mary, so to speak, to just use sports terms, was a Hail Mary by Aerith to circumvent Sephiroth's attempt to break Cloud. It was
Okay.
like a soft play by Aerith to who recognized that if Cloud were to fall further into despair in that moment because of his state, he would have surely fallen. And so it was the best that she could do in that moment. It was sort of create this, maybe a last minute, like imprecise surgical delusion. And I do think there's even a possibility that, she's through some kind of prescient communication, or otherwise communicated that as a plan to Tifa. So my concept is that we're not. Yeah. My concept on that is that Aerith is, not physically alive. That the true nature of reality is that, she met her original fate, and that the delusion that Cloud is experiencing is going to be fed further into the live stream sequence or the Cloud's mind sequence, which will now, I think, create, perhaps the large narrative arc of part 3. And there's a bunch of imagery that I think that supports this. The you look at the rift in the sky, that as sort of a point of evidence that, oh, maybe she's in one of these, Cloud is living in two different worlds.
Yeah.
And I get that imagery until you compare that line in the sky, that rift in the sky, to Cloud's mind, and you realize it's the same rift, right?
Yeah.
And also there's a variety of explanation that sort of indicates that the interlude world or worlds is something that it has a different nature than the top level world, right? It's not the world; they're worlds within the live stream.
Yeah.
We get that dialogue in Cosmo Canyon. It seems so. The interlude world seems so curated to Aerith's specific relationships. Like the reason that Biggs is alive there is because Biggs and Aerith had a relationship that was described in Traces of Two Paths.
Mm-hmm.
He ran that orphanage right next to her house.
Right.
The reason that Kyrie is there, Kyrie knew Aerith. Was frequented the church. So all of the characters that seem to make it into that interlude world seem to be, echoes or remnants of things specific to Aerith. So that gives us an idea that the nature of these worlds are not grounded in the same type of causality that the main world is, that the, prime Beagle timeline is. So I don't think the nature of that world is indicating anything other than perhaps, a mental state. And, we tie that also into the conversation about Yogacara, and, the world being sort of defined by hopes and dreams, etc. So I'm not saying that for sure that means that some thing or mechanism can't make Cloud's dreams or delusions or reality. I don't see any indication that that's what they're doing. But if it is, you know, I'm open to it. Like, that's fine. Please just you know, make it good if you're going to do that. But my current interpretation of events is that the primary purpose of us seeing two versions of Aerith's death, one where she averts her fate and one where she meets her fate, are to create a thread that allows the Cloud's Mind sequence, the true climax according to the devs of Final Fantasy VII, to have a much wider presence in Part 3.
All right, everybody, that's where we're going to wrap up Part 1, if you can believe it. I know that it feels like a little bit of a cliffhanger, but tell them what we can expect from Part 2, Wade.
The unknown journey will continue in Part 2, where Evan's going to recap everything, all the opinions and theories that Clarke has had, and then we're going to go even deeper, so don't miss us next week.
See you next episode, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Big thanks to Husky by the Geek for the new intro and outro music. Amazing. Thank you so much. Thanks to Nick Smith, who did our graphics. And thanks to Clarke for the interview. Also, thanks to you, viewers like you. Have a great week.